Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're enjoying your first day here at reInvent. Today we're going to talk about mainframe modernization, and specifically an approach to mainframe modernization called replatforming. Now, replatforming is a fast-paced approach to modernization, and it was first used in 1991 to migrate mainframe workloads off the mainframe. My name is Barry Tate. I'm a partner migration advisor for mainframe here at AWS. And this is my 30th year spent working in mainframe modernization. And what I can tell you throughout my 30 years is that mainframe modernization is a journey, and no two journeys are the same. You've got different starting points and you've got different destinations, and there's multiple approaches you can take based on your drivers and your short and your long-term goals. At AWS, we've got a mindset of working backwards from the customer, and that's often the case with mainframe modernization. You're working backwards from a business problem that you're trying to solve. It could be a compelling event such as an enterprise license agreement or a data center renewal that's coming up in 18 months to 2 years. And sometimes it's that time-based, near-term, compelling event that looks to then dictate the type of approach that you select. Today you're going to hear the journeys of two AWS customers, Kemper and Empower. Both were faced with compelling events that led them to select a mainframe replatforming approach to exit the mainframe data center and replatform their workloads to AWS. We're going to hear about their compelling events, we'll hear about their journey, we'll hear about how they're able to now innovate further since they've replatformed to AWS. But before we get there, I just want to provide a little bit of a background on replatforming. Take a look at what's in scope to be replatformed. What are some of the benefits of replatforming? What are some of the challenges that customers are facing? And what does the journey look like to go from the mainframe to AWS? That's a big number, 800 billion. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that's the number of stars in the solar system and the galaxy. But if you ask Alexa, you'll find that's about 100 to 400 billion. So this is much, much bigger. According to a 2022 Vance and Bourne study that was commissioned by Micro Focus, now Rocket Software, this was the number of production COBOL lines of code in daily use. Let's see a show of hands. How many people have contributed to that number? Excellent. So why do I bring up COBOL? It's really difficult to talk about mainframe modernization without talking about COBOL. It's the most prevalent legacy language on the planet. Yes, there's other languages, Adabas Natural, Broadcom, IDMS, and ADZO, but COBOL is very prevalent. It's also used by both of the customer successors we're going to hear today, and you find COBOL across legacy systems all over the world supporting global industries. But what we're hearing are challenges our customers are facing. Challenges related to cost. The mainframe can be expensive. There was a 2021 NASCO cloud study that stated that the main driver for migrating off the mainframe was reduced cost. Yeah, and cost is important. I cover public sector at AWS. And in public sector, multiple state agencies are often managed by a central IT organization. What happens is if one agency moves off the mainframe, those costs are then distributed to the other agencies until, guess what, one agency's left. And their compelling event then comes around when they've got a data center renewal coming up. But there's other things other than cost. There's limited agility, constrained innovation. We're hearing about customers who have difficulty implementing new development processes like CI/CD and DevOps. Last month, I was speaking to a customer. They said all they wanted to do was to make a change to a single field in one of their applications, just add a couple of digits. They had access to the source code and they had developers who could make the change, but they were frightened to make the change because they hadn't recompiled their applications in years. They didn't know what the downstream effect was going to be of recompiling their applications, so they were frozen. So that's certainly an issue. There's also an issue around constrained innovation and data. Data is locked in the mainframe. We're seeing customers who are wanting to innovate to leverage machine learning, artificial intelligence. And then you've got risk. You've got risk associated with technical debt, with maybe software that hasn't been patched in many, many years. It's now out of compliance. And you've also got risk related to skills that are diminishing on the mainframe. So sometimes it's not a question of if you're going to migrate application workloads, it's when, and then it's how. We'll call this the R slide. except somebody snuck in some begins with A at the start there, but you could call that reuse. So there's many R's. Again, we work backwards from the customer. We start with a discovery, and during the discovery we understand what each customer's challenges are, what are the drivers, what are their short and long-term goals. That then leads us to select the approach or multiple approaches. It's not a one sort of glove-fits-all approach here. You can have multiple approaches, but you typically have one primary approach for a group of applications. This weekend you hear sessions around refactoring, reimagining. There's going to be a lot of buzz about generative AI. Took me about 4 minutes to bring in generative AI. There you go. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we go through today as well. But today we're going to focus on replatforming. I mentioned it was the most proven approach. The first documented replatforming project was in 1991, Burlington Coat Factory here in the US. They partnered with a company called Unicorn, who had a product called Unikix, right? Unikix, kicks on Unix, yeah, you get it, right? And Unikix had that ability to move their transactional environment, and they partnered with Micro Focus to provide the COBOL development and runtime support. Now, can you imagine being that CEO of Burlington Coat Factory when they asked the Unicorn team, so have you got any references? Who's done this before? It's a brave CIO. Now, the concept behind replatforming is recompilation of the code, adapting where necessary, moving to a mainframe compatible runtime environment in the target. You're limiting the amount of change. So you retain primary languages like COBOL, PL1, and JCL. You make adaptations where necessary. You consolidate other languages like assembler. But you're going for functional equivalence. Data is also retained as well, or you do have the ability to transform. So where would you consider replatforming? Again, we work backwards from the customer, and one of the first questions I usually ask the customer is the application meeting the business needs for the most part, right? There's going to be some stuff you might want to change and enhance. And if the answer is yes, the following question is then around skills and development skills. Now, if they turn around and say it's not really meeting the needs right now, we could certainly look at maybe a reimagine, or if it's a commodity-based application, you could look to replace with a package. A lot of times, though, they might have started out life as a packaged application 10, 20, 30 years ago, but it's been so heavily customized that it can't be moved. So you look at replatforming, and again, you look at the skills, and you think, well, can I transition my skills from COBOL to another language? I was working with a customer 2 years ago in North America. They actually completed a very successful COBOL to Java refactor project. However, they then realized they've got 90 to 100 COBOL developers they need to transition to become Java developers. They then turned to replatform instead. Some of the major drivers are also around cost. Again, these are complex projects. Anybody who says that they're doing this for the fun of it and cost isn't involved is telling a little white lie. Cost is important. It's a primary driver. You can take those cost savings and look to implement and innovate when you're done with the migration. And then typically there's an aggressive time frame. Again, this is fast-paced. This is the accelerated way off your mainframe for your applications. Let's look at some of the benefits. I mentioned cost. We've typically seen around 60 to 7% cost savings coming from a CapEx model on the mainframe to more of a pay-as-you-go on-demand usage in the cloud. The main cost savings comes from third-party software. There's been an aggregation over the years of mainframe software vendors, so it's limiting the choice of solution and increasing the cost. You've then got the increased agility, the resiliency, the scalability of the cloud. You can look to leverage tool chains straight from the AWS console instead of having to procure and install and configure and manage software. You can scale resources up and down on demand to meet your business needs. You've also got the observability of the cloud. You've got automated runtime, health monitoring, security and compliance, elastic compute, high availability, disaster recovery, all things you should expect for your mainframe class workloads. And then you've got reduced technical debt. And you'll say, well, Barry, didn't you just say that you're still going to retain COBOL and JCL and VSAM and DB2? Isn't that the same thing? But all these projects start with an assessment. And during that assessment, you figure out what's in scope. All right? If it's not in scope, it doesn't get migrated. In one of the customer success stories you'll hear today, they managed to reduce about 30–40% of out of scope just through the assessment. You're also consolidating languages and consolidating data types, so you're left with something that's much more manageable. Then you've got improved developer productivity. Many times in the mainframe, you're still leveraging an ISPF, TSO, green screen environment. Perhaps you're still putting display statements in your code. You're transitioning over in AWS to a visual IDE-based environment. It's graphical. You can put, command. You've got debugging and watches on your fields. You've got integration with CI/CD and DevOps, allowing you to be more productive and shorten that time to market for new release and new features. I had a customer in the UK, actually in public sector, who I support a couple of years ago. They had 25 million lines of COBOL. One of the reasons they wanted to migrate was that they had this huge backlog of development work that needed to be done. When they moved to the AWS environment, they were able to go from 2 releases of the software a year to 800 releases within the first 12 months. Many people think this is just a technical project, but these are also business projects and people projects as well, and you've got to think about who can be affected by these projects. I talked about developer productivity, but the biggest group of users who can be affected is the end users. And you've got to think about end user retraining. With replatforming, you can literally take the same TN3070 client and leverage it, use it on the target environment without change, without retraining. There's a customer I once worked with in the early 2000s, and we cut them over on a weekend, and we checked back in with them on the Monday, and we asked how things were going, and they said, "I thought we were cutting over at the weekend." We said, "Well, we did." They said, "But it looks exactly the same." We said, "That's the point, right? All we did was change the IP address and port in the TN3070 client, and it pointed to the new application." So you've got to think about the organizational transition. You've also got your partners as well. There shouldn't be any effect to your partners with these projects. Finally, innovation. You're positioning yourself for future innovation once you've migrated your applications to AWS. I'm going to touch more on that a little bit later. Okay, here's the rub. To get all those benefits, you've also got to complete the journey from the mainframe to the cloud. And here's where we're helping to simplify that journey and accelerate the journey through our AWS Mainframe Modernization Service. The AWS Mainframe Modernization Service provides a platform to migrate, modernize, execute and manage applications on AWS. Provides a managed runtime to manage and operate your applications. It also provides, from the AWS console, access to the tool chains during the project to analyze the code, to convert the code, to test, deploy the code as well. We'll call this the egg slide. You're going to see why in a moment. At the heart of it, you've got the yolk, the code and your data, the crown jewels, right? We've got 2 supported mainframe replatforming tool chains with the Mainframe Modernization Service. There's the Rocket software, now Micro Focus Enterprise Service solution. And there's also the NTT Data Unikick solution that I mentioned that was used back in 1991 by Burlington Coat Factory. Now, there's much more to code and data replatforming, or much more to a project than code and data replatform, I should say. You're going for functional equivalence. With functional equivalence, you've then got to think about your operations. On the mainframe, something goes wrong at 3 o'clock in the morning, you've got to make sure that your operators are alerted. They're able to fix the problem. If you've got a job schedule, the job A calls B is dependent on job C, you need the same thing in the target. You're going for functional equivalence. This is where the Mainframe Modernization Service has integrations with solutions such as RDS, the Relational Database Service, support for security through Identity Access Manager and Cognito, support for monitoring through CloudWatch, or scheduling through BMC Control-M or Stonebranch. We recently announced support for print management from Lever and Shout's VPSX solution as well. In Vegas about 20 years ago, I was at an event and I was asked the question, what's the 3 most important things in a mainframe migration project? I said, number 1, testing. Number 2, testing. And number 3, testing. Now, as my wise Scottish mother would say, there's always a wee bit of truth in jest, you know. Testing, though, is where the rubber hits the road in these projects. It's 60 to 70% of the project. Testing begins day zero, making sure you've done your housekeeping, that you've got a good test plan, test data, test cases. Testing doesn't begin when you deliver code. So anything you can do to accelerate testing helps. We've got several accelerators. We have, through data replication, we have support for precisely CDC solution. We have BMC solution to support file transfer. We have integration with CI/CD and DevOps, and we also have an application testing component as well. That allows us to record test cases on the mainframe, be it 3270 based or batch based, record the test case, record the incoming data state as well. And then it allows us to provision on demand using CloudFormation templates the target test environments with the converted test case and converted data on demand. Again, anything you can do to simplify the testing is important. And then there's a safe pair of hands. These are complex projects. Does anybody remember that Staples advert in the early 2000s? They had that little red button, press the button, and they said, that was easy. Well, these projects aren't easy, all right? You need a safe pair of hands as well. We have a mainframe migration competency network of partners who have demonstrated they can deliver these projects end to end over many years. We also have our AWS Professional Services, or ProServe organization, with a center of excellence. And you're going to hear from our customers today, they leverage both partners and ProServe. Again, these projects aren't easy, but with the right blend of people, technology, process, you can certainly look to help simplify and de-risk and make the projects more efficient. Okay, we've had a bit of a background in Replatform. I think it's time to bring it to life with the first of our two customers. I'd like to welcome to the stage from Kemper, Mr. Alok Mehta.
Thank you, Barry. Mainframe modernization, it's like the movie Lords of the Ring, where you leave the comfort of a fort to a promised journey of the cloud. If you have the right fellowship and you have the best practices, you'll make that journey just fine. Good afternoon. My name is Alok Mehta. I am CIO, Business Systems, which is application development, for Kemper Insurance. Kemper has got two lines of products, Kemper Auto, which serves non-standard auto, and Kemper Life, which has final expense policies. Mainframe has been part of Kemper ecosystem for over 40 years. Over that time, we have offloaded a lot of applications. But in 2023, it was about 14 months or so, we made a decision to essentially exit the data center. To Barry's point about compelling event, that was the compelling event for us to migrate the applications that were in the mainframe because we were sunsetting the data center. For that, we needed a plan, goal, plan, execution strategy, so on and so forth. Problem statement at a high level always turns out to be complete the project on time within budget. However, once you peel the onion, you start to see the details. From business standpoint, you want to reduce the operational cost, which essentially means licensing agreements, especially as it relates to hardware and software leases as well as licenses. Minimum disruption. Barry mentioned smooth transition over the weekend. That is exactly what the business is looking for. Minimum disruption equates to replatformation. In other words, minimum changes, and that's what business is expecting. Those were the business goals. From IT standpoint, migrating the application to a cost-effective platform, which essentially means AWS cloud for us, only because all our applications were already migrated, and there were solutions that were already allowing us to run the COBOL platform applications. Execute fast, obviously, because we had the timeline, 16 months or so. We were shutting down the data center. And finally, execute at a lower cost. Obviously, we want to make sure we're efficient. With these program goals and problem statements, we were now on to execution, defining the scope. Before we go into the execution and scope, I want to highlight some of the best practices, which essentially boils down to three sort of large categories, but they are sort of like mixed together. In other words, they're not sequential. You start with the discovery of the current situation, which boils down to basically going through each one of the application and figuring out their dispositions. Whether you're going to refactor, you're going to re-augment, whether you're going to rehost, replatform, so on and so forth. In our case, replatform formed the bulk of the work. We also took the opportunity to retire close to about 30% of the applications, which was icing on the cake just because we did the assessment through a variety of different methods, tools, and so on and so forth. We also had an opportunity to reimagine some application on low code, no code, only because these applications were simple and fit the bill there. Plenty of opportunities as you take a look at a project like this, specifically when you're looking at retiring and also automating. We'll talk a little bit more about what can be automated, what did we automate, so on and so forth. Selecting the target environment, extremely important as part of the discovery phase. From target environment standpoint, we did a bunch of proof of concept, proof of technology. Micro Focus COBOL on AWS ran the COBOL workload just fine, including the data that was associated with those applications. With AWS preferred partner in terms of mainframe migration, we had a list of partners along with our SIs that helped us through this journey. However, the heart and soul of the entire program was the CBA, cost benefit analysis. This is where the hard benefits such as reduction in software licenses as well as hardware leases play a big role. As Barry mentioned, 60 to 70% of savings. That soft benefits in terms of efficiency gain is also baked into the CBA. NPV, net present value, and internal rate of return became the metric of how we were communicating back and forth with our business partner, with our finance partners, and how you want to essentially run the program. You want to stay true to the CBA, and that makes this program extremely important in terms of success. You also want to compare cost of doing nothing. In other words, what if you were to run the mainframe applications on the legacy platform in perpetuity, like 5 or 10 years, and you compare that to the cost to be, and you take a look at the impressive NPV and IRR that you're going to get. That is how you're going to actually work through your internal sort of stakeholdership to drive the project forward, to sell the project, to complete the project, and so on and so forth. And that's exactly how many organizations do it. That's how we did it. But what about the execution? What about the scope? When we take a look at the scope, it fell into a bunch of different categories. You've got hundreds of applications, thousands of lines of code, complex screens as far as kick screens, online batch processing, which is pretty standard of a lot of these applications. Mixed programming languages, got a bunch of different tools that you can use to convert into COBOL, because at the end of the day, it's the COBOL runtime that you need. You need to make sure the COBOL runs on the runtime environment on AWS. In terms of the databases, preference, of course, is to keep it as is. And all these databases are supported on the AWS with tweaks, some more complex than the others. In terms of the architecture, especially from non-functional standpoint, things like SLAs, disaster recovery, security, they're sort of baked into a platform like AWS, which you can configure, you can automate, so on and so forth. SDLC automation through CI/CD pipeline. We'll talk a little bit more when we take a look at the architecture, how you can essentially automate just about everything, all your environment, including as you're going through the journey. However, the key thing that highlights here, at least for me, is the rollout strategy and the testing. They go hand in hand. Why do we say that? As far as the rollout strategy is concerned, conventional wisdom will tell you implement these or release these applications one at a time in a smaller chunk as opposed to a big bang. However, the early phase of this project, especially in the discovery phase, my delivery lead, Chitty, and I had a debate about how best to release these applications. Should we go one at a time incrementally, or should we go big bang? After convincing each other, we agreed on big bang. However, that needed robust testing. Barry mentioned testing, testing, testing. I would say testing, testing, parallel testing. What is parallel testing? Well, you run your workload on the legacy platform, and then the following day, you copy the input and output files onto the new target platform, and then you run it again the following day, and you compare the two. And we wanted to do that for a long period of time so we can get confidence and make sure that everything that we have done in terms of conversion, so on and so forth, on AWS platform would run and would have high degree of confidence. So we started the journey of testing, and it took almost 6-8 weeks to sort of complete. As we were going through the journey, Chitty would call me around 7 p.m. every night, basically saying, this is like a movie. Get it? Movie theme here. The movie would start around 7 p.m. and Chitty would say, well, there's no twists and turns right now. Things are going great. And there's a bit of bromance going on because we've got all the celebration from the day before that fixes, and so our batches would run maybe, a few hours more, only to find an event which would turn the bromance into a suspense. Now, I would also have a deep conversation with Chitty in terms of, well, as long as the suspense doesn't turn into horror, in other words, we miss the SLA, we'll be fine. And so we were. We released the movie on June 1st, almost 30 days before the licensing renewals dates were up for renewal. Guess what? We called the movie Chitty Chitty Big Bang. However, there was a sequel to the movie, and that was data backup. Please do not leave the data backup as an afterthought like we did. With the help of GenAI, we converted close to about 43 JCLs, generated 4,300 JCLs in a matter of a few days, which our mainframe operator essentially told us would take weeks to create and copy and so on and so forth. So GenAI through Bedrock LLM played a big role. And our mainframe operators, when they copied the last bit of data on June 30th, called me and said, thank goodness this technology wasn't there 40 years ago. That is the power of GenAI. With that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the architecture. Pretty straightforward if you take a look at it from hindsight. When we migrated all the mixed programming languages using a variety of tools into COBOL runtime, Micro Focus hosted on EC2 scalable, AWS Cloud gives you the availability zone, so that takes care of things like DR, high availability, and so on and so forth. EC2 scalable integrated with S3 bucket and EKS gives you the performance that you need to meet your SLA 6:30 every morning when you actually have to have the online available. vSAM, DB2, and all the files generally remain the same. That's the reason for that, because you want to keep as a part of the replatforming, you want to keep things like to like, minimal changes. In AWS, you can host just about everything as is. Tons of scheduler available. We chose Control-M. Things work just fine from that standpoint. Ended up cleaning up a lot of batch file schedules and from retire standpoint. Additionally, from FTP standpoint, bunch of different tools available to copy the data, which was used during the parallel testing as well as the final cutover. CI/CD, heavy use of CI/CD in terms of automating various development environment, which I'm sure everyone has done it in their projects one way or the other. In terms of security, encryption, authorization was all sort of like integrated. RACF converted to AWS directory services, integrated with Azure AD and things of that nature. Databases, as I mentioned, generally remain the same. For backup, we ended up using Glacier, again, fully integrated within the platform, automated through CI/CD, things of that nature. For observability, with CloudWatch, CloudTrail, internal loggings of the systems, which you can use things like Splunk, we ended up using that, and that worked just fine, fully integrated. All in all, the scalable solution allowed us to meet the SLAs, fully secured and scalable, which was heart and soul of our guiding principle, because we did not want to cut any corner from architecture standpoint. Lessons learned. From outcome standpoint, one of the key things was on time within budget, which we achieved with flying colors. We had a downtime, zero downtime for our users. First couple of days, there were some access issues and things of that nature. Otherwise, pretty smooth transition. When it comes to lessons learned, there are a few things you want to highlight. Availability of key resources, fellowship, internal and external resources, making sure you have all the right folks who knows from business standpoint as well as legacy environment ecosystem standpoint. Those are extremely important folks on your team. On AWS side, definitely need a bunch of architects for infrastructure, security, scalability, and also your application, make sure they're fully integrated from CI/CD standpoint. Very important as far as those skill sets are concerned. All these should be highlighted earlier on in your assessment phase, discovery phase. We talked about release strategy, rollout strategy, how tightly integrated it is with testing, chitty chitty big bang, testing, parallel testing. A lot of challenges as it relates to technical compatibility. The data on the source and data on the target's not the same. You need to make sure you account for that time. Missing source files for the compiled code. How do you decompile? How do you recreate that capability and functionality? Many ways, but you need to account for that time. Cost management, heart and soul of our program was the CBA that we ended up using as part of the program management to drive the project forward and work very closely with the business partners, very closely with our finance partners. Lots of integration challenges. The legacy ecosystem has been around for a long time. It integrates with your printer, it integrates with your file network, integrates with all sorts of different capabilities. AWS environment with Micro Focus works the same way. You're going to work with field developed solutions, FDSs, and you can integrate with just about anything on the target platform on the AWS side as well. On the security and compliance standpoint, cloud provides you easy way to essentially configure the authorization, authentication, both for the data at flight, especially from encryption standpoint, and data at rest. All these capabilities are much needed for new regulatory compliance requirements from NYDFS, New York Department of Financial Services, especially if you are in the financial services space. These become extremely easy to sort of like configure. SDLC automation. I mentioned we did not want to cut any corners from architecture standpoint. Our SDLC was fully automated from environment deployment standpoint, variety of different utilities used to create data, to test data, create utilities. I talked about copying data, restoring data, so on and so forth. Gen AI was pivotal from the SDLC automation standpoint. Change management, another key element of the program's success. Organizational change management for all stakeholders as it relates to your users, your developers, and your operators. Our change management team was part of the ecosystem right from the beginning, and that is extremely important for the success. So what's next? Well, continue to use tools like Amazon Q to document the source code for onboarding and application, so on and so forth. See where else we can use Gen AI, especially as it relates to innovation, efficiency, things of that nature. Parity of development tool. You've got a lot of tools in legacy platform that have been around for a long time for developer productivity. Equal set of tools are needed on the new platform. Many are available. Some you just have to develop on your own. Last but not the least, refactor opportunistically. As we have the data available, all on AWS with the rest of our open system, we look to refactor these applications as we go forward. With that, thank you for sharing the story here, and I welcome Mac Jitta from Empower so they share their story. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok. My movie starts. It's Mission Impossible. Who here can imagine migrating a mainframe application in less than 12 months? These are complex systems. It takes a while. I'm Mac Jitta. I lead Target Architecture and Cloud Center of Excellence at Empower. Let me start by introducing who Empower is. Empower is the second largest retirement services provider in the United States. We serve 19 million customers and manage over $1.8 trillion in assets. We are headquartered in Greenwood Village, Colorado. Our mission is to enable financial freedom through innovative investment, retirement, and wealth management products. We also have a personal dashboard that helps manage individual assets or finances in one console, which can help personal finances big deal. Our vision is to transform financial lives through advice, technology, and people. Well, let's get to my movie, the mission, the story. Back in 2021, July of 2021, Empower acquired Prudential's retirement business. It's a bunch of plans that came to Empower. With a mission to close the acquisition by March of 2024, it was a major mission. We closed the acquisition in 2022. And with the close, we acquired a bunch of applications. Some of them are Windows applications, some of them are Linux applications, and some are mainframe applications. Well, here's the problem, the big problem. Empower has been an AWS shop. We migrated our entire workload, well, most of our workloads, into AWS back in 2019 and 2020. And we have been big time into AWS with all our applications. But we didn't have any mainframe at Empower. There's no mainframe. And we didn't have any resources to manage mainframe workload. However, we needed an accelerated solution to get that application out of Prudential's data center. We own the application and we need it. And the application I'm talking about is ERF, Experience Rated Fund. For those of you who don't know what Experience Rated Fund is, it is an application that helps us track the balances for our plans, and it helps report that out. Here is the application, extremely familiar for most of you if you're into mainframes. We had a thick client. Users were using the thick client, communicating with the mainframe or MQ. And the mainframe application is a pretty standard application with KICS transactions, COBOL code, DB2 database, JCL procedures, and so on and so forth, with a bunch of data coming in and a lot of numbers crunched, and then finally you're getting data out, which is sent to downstream systems, which will report out that data. We were using other technologies like CyberFusion for reporting out data, and the scheduler was used to process the data too. So let me keep moving. Okay, now, quick conclusion. We concluded that we needed a quick solution. So the initial instinct was to go with another provider who can run a mainframe. Somebody who can run a mainframe, we can take the application, run it at the provider as a service provider, and that should solve our problem. Right? That was our initial instinct. We moved forward with that instinct. Until 2023, we have been going back and forth with this provider until we realized mainframe, as Barry and my friend Alok has been saying, is expensive, it's costly, and we realized that in 2023 of March, saying this is cost prohibitive. To migrate the workload is going to cost millions. To run the workload, it is going to cost millions per year. We needed an alternative. So back in 2022, I was at the reInvent, like one of you guys. And mainframe modernization was a topic up there. And I learned about Micro Focus and mainframe modernization capabilities at that time. And when the leadership came down to me asking, hey, are there any options here? I engaged our AWS account team to start thinking about it because of the Micro Focus capabilities. Our account team is excellent. They immediately brought in AWS ProServe to help us out. AWS ProServe came in within 15 days, I think. They came in, they got into a relationship with us, and we started working with AWS ProServe to migrate this workload. So this is the standard process both Barry and Alok has been speaking about. AWS has the standard process to migrate. They have almost templatized the way to migrate mainframe workload out of a mainframe. They have this analyzer which helps understand the mainframe application internally, understand the components, and understand the scope of the effort required to migrate this workload. The converter converts the COBOL code from the mainframe compiled code to Micro Focus based compiled code. Well, I've been saying Micro Focus. It's acquired a couple of times during the migration process. It's gone to OpenText, and then it got acquired by Rocket. I think they call Rocket Software right now. AWS ProServe engaged Micro Focus as partner in this engagement. Both AWS and Micro Focus helped us migrate and convert the workload into AWS with standard CI/CD scripts, build and deploy process, and standard cloud ecosystem, which is much more familiar to Empower. This got us into our comfort zone now. The application remained exactly the same. It did not change at all. For the user, it's exactly the same application. It's communicating with AWS over MQ again. Now, the difference is MQ is running on EC2 right there. Mainframe modernization, AWS Mainframe Modernization Service is running the COBOL components out there. And the data is migrated into DB2 on Linux. And we had familiar ecosystem with CloudWatch and CloudTrail monitoring the components right here, and the data moving into AWS S3 and so on. The extensions we have, we were able to use the cloud native components like Lambda and other AWS native components to extend it, like for reporting purposes and for other purposes required. As you can see, it's quite familiar ecosystem for AWS shop. There you go. So we finally managed to migrate, and our mission was accomplished. And thank you, AWS ProServe and AWS account team, for helping us do it within time and within budget. It saved us millions of dollars in implementation cost. It saved us millions of dollars in run costs. And as you all know, mainframe is not cheap. It is quite expensive to run. And also avoided the fines with any delays that we would have faced, we would have been hit with. The users were extremely happy. Those are some comments from the business owner, Randall Mandor. They did not feel that it was a change at all. The experience was the same. There was no user training required, and the application worked just like it was all the time. Next steps. Just like Prudential Retirement Services, we acquired another business from MassMutual a few years ago, MassMutual's retirement business. They had the same application like IRF. And one of the things we want to do is rationalize those applications into one application. The second thing we're doing, we've been experimenting with a platform called Amazon Bedrock and Claude to convert and modernize code at Empower. We want to use the same patterns to migrate and modernize these components into a more cloud-native architecture. That will be the next stage of a mission, or the sequel coming out. Back to you, Barry.
Thanks, Mac. Okay, we heard from both customers how they're now planning for future innovation. Now they successfully replatformed their applications to AWS. But replatforming is actually the first phase of innovation. It gives you that immediate business benefits of the cloud: increased agility, scalability, resiliency, improved developer productivity. So it's not the end of the journey. It's just the beginning. You get to take advantage of the 200 plus AWS services and thousands of AWS marketplace solutions that are available. You get to establish connectivity with distributed applications, ERP solutions, CRM systems, either programmatically through APIs or through direct data access. You get to replatform your data, and again, your data is really your gold mine here. If you replatform your data and consolidate your data to RDS, you get that support of zero ETL, extract, transform, and load integration with solutions such as Amazon Redshift. Having that ability takes away the complexity of managing the ETL pipelines. And it also provides the integration with solutions such as Amazon QuickSight for real-time analytics, or Amazon SageMaker, a machine learning platform to derive actionable insights from your applications, or maybe Amazon Bedrock, a managed service to build generative AI applications. And we also heard Alok talking about what he's doing with Amazon Q. You can build natural language queries against your application source code once it's been migrated. And then you've got the ability to seamlessly integrate with mobile and web applications, to use solutions like Amazon Pinpoint to support social media and email campaigns. And then one thing I get quite often when I'm talking to customers is the ability to transform their applications to serverless, event-driven applications. That goes way back then in the discussion to, well, what's your compelling events? What does your drivers look like? What's your time to execute this? Then they tell us, yeah, we've got to get this done in 18 months to 2 years. So then you've got to reset expectations a little bit. And our guidance then would be to replatform first, then take advantage by modernizing the business differentiating services, taking maybe some batch applications and migrating those to be real-time based transactions, leveraging solutions like Amazon EventBridge and Lambda and step functions. So you can see that replatform might be the first phase, but it also extends the business value of your applications post-replatforming. So I want to thank both Alok and Mac for sharing their replatforming stories with you today. Both selected the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service replatform with Rocket Software Enterprise Server Solution to successfully migrate their applications while facing their own compelling events, their Mission Impossible and their movie, Chitty Chitty Big Bang. I'm a child of the 70s, so I remember that movie pretty well. I heard a few people laugh before, so replatforming, it's the fastest path to exit your mainframe app when your applications are meeting your needs, or perhaps your applications are becoming a blocker to maybe a larger data center exit, or maybe 5 years down the line you're looking to replace your applications. But it's the fastest way to get those application workloads off the mainframe. And how can we say that? Well, it's the least amount of change. It's the least amount of technical disruption, and it's the least amount of disruption to users as well, to the end users, to your partners, to your developers. So it mitigates risk through least amount of change and accelerates that time to value and innovation on AWS. So I can't go all the way through here without talking about generative AI. And what can generative AI do for replatforming? Will it replace replatforming? We heard Alok mention he already used generative AI in his project. He used it for some testing. He used it to replace some code that was missing. There's lots of use cases how generative AI can look to accelerate and increase the efficiency of a replatforming project. Perhaps it's documenting the code base. Perhaps it's helping plan with our wave planning, the Chitty Chitty Big Bang, the wave planning that Alok was talking about. Maybe it'll help with that. Maybe it'll help with testing. I'm sure it will help with creating of test cases and test data and accelerating the testing. Perhaps some of those operational data migration tasks that somebody has to do, migrating the job schedules, migrating the security profiles, and then maybe optimizing the code as well, optimizing the COBOL code further, or decomposing that monolith down into some event-driven services. There's lots of things that generative AI will be able to do alongside replatforming to increase the efficiency, to reduce the time and reduce the risk of a replatforming project. So perhaps there's not an easy button yet for mainframe replatforming, but we're getting closer to having an easier button for replatforming. So I want to thank you all for attending the event today. There's plenty more mainframe modernization based events. We had a couple this morning. If you missed, you can catch them on YouTube. I just ask one more thing. Could you take 2 minutes of your time and complete the survey? It'd be really appreciated. Your feedback is invaluable to us. And also, the three of us are going to be making ourselves available outside if anybody wants to chat further about mainframe replatforming or anything to do with mainframe modernization. With that, I thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the week here at reInvent.